Hey everyone, we're here for a deck tech today with Mono-Red Eldrazi. So if you've been reading my content lately, I've been harping on the fact that this standard format is just awesome. And I think a big part of that is that there's such a large core of powerful cards and interactions in the format that you can kind of take bits and pieces from various different decks and kind of just make whatever you want, really. And as long as you play 10 of the 100 powerful cards in standard or whatever arbitrary number I just made up, then your deck is going to be pretty good. So this deck, the reason I built it is because you're probably aware that Chandra Flamecaller has started to kind of explode in popularity. It's an extremely powerful card. She's finally kind of getting the respect she deserves.
Yeah, the Mardu Green deck makes great use of her, and I've been really impressed now that deck has Sylvan Advocate, how well it functions, because you can
get aggressive.
Yeah, you can get more aggressive, and you turn the corner really efficiently with Chandra, where you use your removal spells to mop up some of their bigger creatures while the 2/3 body holds off the ground, the smaller ones, and then on turn 6 you play Chandra. Your Sylvan Advocate's 4/5.
Hit him for 10.
Yeah, you either plus and hit them for 10 if you're really far ahead, or if they still have some things you need to mop up, you minus attack for 4, and then you have 10 points on the board and they have nothing, and the game's basically over.
Yep. As a Planeswalker with a lot of loyalty, she's just, historically, Planeswalkers with a lot of loyalty are pretty difficult to remove. There's only a specific subset of cards that can typically remove them.
We're playing one of them.
That is true. Typically, people have to go towards cards like Utter End, and that card is not seeing a lot of play right now.
Yeah.
Ruinous Path.
The format has gotten a little bit faster, so the 4 mana cost on Utter End has become a lot more prohibitive. I've seen a few more Ruinous Paths. Also, the existence of Dark Dwellers means the difference between 3 and 4 is a lot bigger than it used to be.
For sure.
Another reason that Ruinous Path has become a little bit more popular.
That's a response towards the movement towards Dark Dwellers and just the fact that Chandra's seeing more play. But basically, the point I was trying to make is that Chandra Flamecaller is difficult to remove, and she's probably just going to get 2+1 activations, and that's just a lot of damage, and it's really hard to deal with.
Yeah, especially when your Thopters deal a lot of chip shot damage in here too. Thopter Engineer and P and Kieran. Maybe you can just finish them off with P and Kieran's ability. So there's a lot of easy ways to get 2, 3, 4 damage in here and there, and that means that dealing 8 is pretty easy.
For sure. So Chandra is the reason I built this deck, but a lot of the core and philosophy of the deck is reminiscent of the Mono-Blue Eldrazi deck that started to pick up in popularity on Magic Online. As you can see, the start of our mana curve is Hangerback Walker, Heatran Crawler. We don't have the Eldrazi Displacer, the 2/1 flyer that the Mono-Blue Eldrazi deck has, and that's also kind of the reason that I've gotten rid of Ghostfire Blade, and this deck is less of an all-in aggro deck and more of a mid-range kind of value deck that can also be aggressive. So Heatran Crawler helps facilitate getting to 4 mana, 5 mana for Reality Smasher, our 4 drops, and also supports our 4 Chandras. Vile Aggregate is just, it's weird. I think that, so a couple weeks ago after the Pro Tour, we were like, it's strange that Vile Aggregate and Eldrazi Sky Spawner are, great, they won the Pro Tour. We kind of just attributed it to the fact that, the Eldrazi mana is broken.
Yep.
But really, the more that I play with these Eldrazi cards, I think they're just actually quite good.
Yeah, Vile Aggregate is a really significant body for its cost.
Mm-hmm.
It's guaranteed to be a 1/5 by itself, and you have a bunch of other cards that can immediately pump it, and so it should be pretty easy to get to a 3/5, and that at that point, 3 mana for a 3/5 trample, ingest, whatever 17 other abilities it has.
Jason Mind Sculptor.
Yeah. Then you're doing pretty good just on rate, and then it has potential to go even beyond that. And I think it's especially important with Chandra because this gives you a cheap creature like Sylvan Advocate in the Mardu Green deck that can sit around, hold off some beats, and then when you play your Chandra, Wrath, or Board away, suddenly you have a creature left over. And maybe it's only a 1/5, maybe you're really smart and you have a Hangerback Walker on 3, and you -3 your Chandra, blow up your own Hangerback Walker, and now you have a 4/5.
Yep.
Because that would be great. You should try to do that.
Yeah, well, Vile Aggregate, so a thing I like about this deck that I've been playing it on Magic Online a fair amount is that it kind of transitions from defense to offense really well, especially because of Chandra. And Vile Aggregate is an awesome defensive creature. It can brick wall, Anafenza, Siege Rhinos, Sylvan Advocates, other large creatures on the ground. And then once you kind of either assemble a Thopter squadron or just get some creatures into play or crack a Foundry of the Consoles, which I'll get to in a minute, Vile Aggregate can go on offense very easily and start hitting for a lot of damage.
Yeah, and once again, like this sort of supplements a lot of the flyers you have from Thopters to give yourself this sort of reach element that isn't with burn spells, but it's more with evasion. Now, like Reality Smasher has Trample 2, Chandra puts on a lot of pressure. It's going to be really difficult for your opponent to play any amount of defense once you turn the corner.
Right. Thopter Engineer is a card that I did not respect much, but I think the major turning point for me was when Tom Ross put it in his Red-Black Dragons deck a couple weeks ago in the SG Tour Stop in Columbus, which he top-8'd, and he got rid of the Hordling Outburst, which was kind of like the standard staple of the 3-mana slot in that deck.
Yeah.
And it doesn't look like a lot. It just makes a Thopter. It's a 1/3 body, but the Thopter is nice at racing. The 1/3 body is able to hold the ground really well and also do some chip shotting. And in combination with P and Kieran Nalaar and Foundry of the Consoles, you actually are able to, and even Hangerback Walker, if it's able to bust open at the right time, you can just randomly get aggressive.
Yeah, and you get to start pumping your Hangerback Walkers immediately. I think it's important in a deck like this to have your early drops play some amount of defense in addition to just playing offense. And Hordling Outburst was sort of pretty mediocre at both, actually.
For sure.
It was a little bit better at playing offense, I would say, especially against the control decks because they don't trade for it as efficiently. But this card is just so much better at playing some amount of defense against aggressive decks, and that's really important. And like it gives you extra offense when you play a P and Kieran on the next turn. You get to attack for 3 in the air, and it just makes more sense given this suite of creatures. All 3 of these play a lot of defense, and then Heatran Crawler just gets you to your high drops that much faster, so that they can start attacking. And if you land a Thought-Knot Seer and a Reality Smasher under the curve, I think we've all seen by now what happens then.
I also didn't even think about this interaction, but Thopter Engineer plus Heatran Crawler is a combo. It allows you to like double spell on weird turns. If you like miss a land drop, you can get your Mana Accelerate into play and play an additional card that turn.
You can like Engineer on 3, Crawler on 4 plus Aggregate, and then Chandra the next turn, something like that. And those little things don't come up that often, and it's hard to weight them a lot in your head, but every little percentage point helps.
Yep, they make the deck play out a little smoother every once in a while.
Yeah, if you turn your 52%er into a 54%er, you're actually doing pretty good.
Yep. The more to the top end of the curve, we have Pia and Kieran Nalaar, kind of just the replacement for Whirler Rogue, I suppose. But Pia is also a better creature at just like handling utility creatures. You can use Hangerback Walker as a really potent offensive weapon with Pia. You can crack it and then start getting aggressive.
Maybe immediately.
True. The additional like chip shotting that Ross was alluding to earlier is certainly relevant. Heatran Crawler is an artifact, technically some synergy there. But Pia and Kieran is just like a nice thing for, again, kind of holding the ground, getting some board position, and then allowing you to get aggressive. I have less Thought-Knot Seers than the Mono Blue Eldrazi deck. Again, this deck is more mid-rangey and controlling than Mono Blue, and I didn't want a ton of this effect because Thought-Knot Seer is really good at turning on your opponents like Crackling Dooms, Abzan Charms, Roasts, and weird spots, and not something that I wanted to lean on exactly, but it still has a good rate. The disruptive element is useful and good in matchups like Rally and Ramp in particular.
Yeah, the standard format's pretty good at handling a card at those stats, so even though the ability is nice, it's hard to imagine wanting to draw 2-3 of those in a large majority of your games, because then your opponent's just going to be able to sort of deal with them at value.
Keep killing them and keep drawing cards.
Yeah, and it's sort of difficult even to use the ability to protect itself. They often just reveal a hand with 2 things that can kill it.
Yep. Usually you're not going to make a bunch of headway if you just have a bunch of Thought-Knot Seers. Reality Smasher is kind of the generic payoff for playing this colorless deck. It's huge. It's extremely punishing. If your opponent doesn't have a Crackling Doom, basically immediately, they're going to get 2 for 1. They're going to get hit for 5. It's great at answering Planeswalkers. It can't get chump blocked. It's just a filthy card.
Yeah, this card is basically the next evolution of the Thunderbolt Hellkite Stormbreath Dragon lineage, and it is every bit as powerful as those cards. So expect to see a lot of it in Standard over the next however long it's in Standard.
Yep. And again, as I've constantly been alluding to, this deck can switch from defense to offense very quickly. And basically, even if your opponent's at 16 life, you can just play Reality Smasher on 5 and then Chandra on 6, and they're kind of dead.
That is 16 damage.
It is 16 damage.
We did the math.
It's not always how it works out, but that is 16 damage. To complement some of this stuff, we have a few removal spells. You can't really lean on like a ton of fiery impulses like most red decks in Standard because our deck is more creature-based, but Roast is good for killing large Sylvan Advocates, Siege Rhinos, Anafenzas, Kalidases, just the big annoying creatures that you have to deal with. Spatial Contortion gives this deck an answer to Mantis Rider in the main deck. It also kills the smaller utility creatures, Unpumped Sylvan Advocates, Jace Vern's Prodigy, Soulfire Grandmasters. And it also can pump your Reality Smashers and Thought-Knot Seers in weird spots. Or Vile Aggregate. Pretty nice with the trample mechanic.
Yeah.
It doesn't come up often, but again, it's another little small percentage thing that gives you some extra points in some weird spots. Heatran Archive, I started this original list when I created it with 4, toned it down a little bit. There's a lot of mana sinks in this deck between just expensive cards like Chandra and Reality Smasher. We also have Pian our Hangerback Walker, and then pretty much all of the lands in the deck that don't produce red mana are utility lands, so we'll get to those in a minute. But this deck is very good at using its mana, and Heatran Archive is something that allows you to accelerate, kind of do all the stuff you want to do, and then you can cash it in for 2 cards.
Or 2 damage.
Or 2 damage. I haven't actually done that yet. I really like drawing cards, but
I'm a little disappointed in you.
Yeah, well, we'll see if it comes up today.
I hope not.
But yeah,
probably means I'm dead.
I've gone lower on the archives, but I still like it as a nice little complementary element to this deck. Getting to the mana base. So, similar to the Mono-Blue Eldrazi deck, we just have a ton of mountains, and then we have essentially these 6 dual lands, which are colorless/red sources. Yeah, it's kind of strange that that's the world we live in, but these off-color pain lands are dual lands in this monocolored deck, if you can wrap your head around that one. Founder of the Consoles, I've talked about it a little bit up until this point. This card is just absolutely awesome. I think it's been extremely underrated throughout its tenure in Standard. With Thopter Engineer, you can just go ahead and start putting pressure on. With Pia, you have more fuel to start throwing it at your opponent. It pumps Vile Aggregate. It gives you some, chump blocking against Thunderbreak Regents if you need to be doing that.
Yeah, the chump blocking I think is really important at protecting Chandra, and you have a lot of ways to do that. And so you can even take over games by playing Chandra, blocking a little bit, and zeroing a couple times, just drawing through your entire deck, and maybe even setting up a turn where you like -2/1 Chandra, play another one, like -3 that one, and take out a huge board.
Yeah, so I mean, it gives the deck a lot of flexibility and some grinding elements. Tomb of the Spirit Dragon is something that we saw way back at the Pro Tour, where Blue, Red, and Soul was kind of the breakout deck of that tournament at PT Origins.
And now we've seen it in Blue Eldrazi, so...
Yep. It's just another thing that gives you this grindy, racy element. It can be really tough for decks to beat this, especially if you can get 2 going. Even with just like 2 or 3 or 4 colorless creatures, somewhere between 4 and 8 life a turn is just insurmountable sometimes.
Yeah, it really life gain. It's just become pretty important the way Magic is played these days.
Like 10 years ago, life gain was kind of made fun of, but now I actively want to have life gain in every single deck I play.
Yeah, it's really easy for decks to kill you from 3, 4, or 5 life just with Crackling Doom, Siege Rhinos, and burn spells. Any deck has some capability of just dealing with those last 2 points. So getting out of that range, getting yourself to 8 or 10, maybe giving yourself that 1 extra turn so that you can make your 6th land drop play your Chandra, or make your 7th land drop and double spell with a couple things and stabilize the board. Really important.
Yep, it all adds up. My last 2 colorless utility lands are kind of the play around slots. Seagate Wreckage, this deck is decent at dumping its hand, and Heatran Archive is kind of a nod to that. It helps. So I've definitely had some games where Seagate Wreckage has run away, but you don't activate it too often. Ruins of Oran Reef has been extremely impressive, especially in combination with like Hangerback Walker or Thopter Engineers. But I'm still a little hesitant of just playing a bunch of Enter the Battlefield tap lands in my 6-drop deck.
Yeah.
But I definitely have my eye on this one as a potentially 2 of.
I think this deck makes actually better use of Ruins than the mono blue version of Eldrazi, because that deck really gets punished for having Enters the Battlefield tap lands. It's really trying to play to the board very quickly. This deck is a little bit slower on that end, and so you're going to have time to play your tap land in a reasonable number of games.
Yep.
And so while you don't want to overload on them and have 3 or 4 and draw a bunch, I could definitely see a second one being good, and I think the first one is great.
All right, well, that's it for the main deck, and you can join us in a moment for the sideboard. All right, back here for the sideboard of Mono-Red Eldrazi. Starting over here, we kind of have our small creature elimination package. We have 2 Arc Lightnings and a Boiling Earth. When I showed this deck to Tom Ross, the very first thing he said is, needs more Arc Lightning and Boiling Earth, so here they are. Just a
Not
nice
surprised.
Yeah, some nice tools for cleaning up small creatures and just general aggression to complement our roasts.
Yeah, tough to play something like Kozilek's Return in this deck when it's filled with Thopters that you really don't want to kill. So Arc Lightning gets the nod.
Yep, and just lack of 7-drops for flashing it back and all that nonsense. We have 4th roast, just basically for Siege Rhino decks. If your opponent goes turn 4 Rhino, turn 5 Rhino against you and you don't have a roast, you can still just get overwhelmed. Siege Rhino is a great card. So that kind of helps eliminate that problem a little bit. Spatial Contortion, just an additional copy for the kind of Jeskai slanted decks that are more like Jason, Mantis riding you, and you need some answers to their early utility creatures that are powerful. Again, as we talked about in the previous deck tech, it can be a combat trick in weird spots, but mostly here for killing Jaces and Mantis riders. Tears of Valakut is a red plummet, essentially. It's good against the aforementioned Mantis Rider, but against Red-Black Dragons, it's definitely your all-star. It can kill Thunderbreak, Regent, and Culligan. The combo of Roast plus Plummet is something we've seen out of like Green Eldrazi, but you gotta do what you gotta do. Yeah, can't have everything in one removal spell.
When you only have one call here, look, your options are limited.
Yeah. Additional Thought-Knot Seers, again, just when we want to like be fighting decks that don't have tons of removal, like Ramp or Rally, and they have key pieces of cards that we need to disrupt, especially when this deck needs to get more aggressive. We have to target their powerful cards and try to get on the board and attack them before they can kind of assemble their big thing. Thought-Knot Seer helps with that process.
Yep.
Eldrazi Obligator is here for Ramp and the Abzan decks. Kind of as I talked about Vile Aggregate, where that card and Sky Spawner and just these generic Eldrazi cards have really impressed me. Obligator's done the same. Ramp can basically just never beat this card. Like, if you take their even Worldbreaker, let alone a Tarka, and hit them for 8, 11, plus anything that you have in play, they just die instantly, basically.
Yep.
3 mana, 3/1 haste isn't bad. If you draw multiples, you just start deploying them and attacking your opponent.
Not the first time we've seen a threaten effect be good against a ramp strategy.
Right.
People have been playing those for a lot of years, and this is a particularly good threaten effect because it comes with a body attached. And
yep.
The threaten part of it sort of curves nicely with what the ramp deck in this format is doing. They're playing their big thing on turn 5, turn 6, in most games. If they're lucky, turn 4.
You immediately steal it and just kill them.
Yeah, exactly. So you've spent the rest of the game setting up, attacking a little bit, and then they play their thing, think they're stable, and instead they're dead.
Yep. And again, as Ross just talked about, the body is really important because sometimes you'll have these weird hands. Traditionally, in the history of Magic, where you had a bunch of your threatens, but you didn't actually have a clock on your opponent. You're kind of just sitting tight, waiting for your opponent to play their big thing so you can steal it and hit them for a big chunk, but they're not dead anymore. So you can just deploy Eldrazi Obligator, get aggressive, and then if you have a second one, you can then steal their big thing and kill them.
Yeah. And this one, I think the last thing it does is attack Chandra. If you have a pretty Thopter-heavy draw, they could ramp into a Chandra, minus it, maybe -2 will kill your P and Kieran and some other things. And then they have the Chandra in play, and you don't really have enough of a board. Just being able to play 3/1 haste, get the Chandra out, make them have something else. Very nice part of the card. And another reason, just the body's very relevant on your threat.
For sure. And then Crumble to Dust is something I've been playing with in Red-Green or Eldrazi, the ramp deck. Just a nice tool for both busting up their curve, the ramp deck, and fighting Rally. If you're able to crumble your opponent's Canopy Vista in most Rally decks, it makes it extremely difficult for them to actually cast their namesake card. They basically have to get the only other 2 white sources in their deck. Just a nice tool for keeping people off base, especially when you can combine it with Thought-Knot Seer. So honestly, it should be a 2 of, and I probably am going to move towards 4 Eldrazi Obligator because that card's impressed me so much, but I still like what Crumble to Dust is doing as far as complementing the general aggressive disruption package. All right, well, that's it for the sideboard, and you guys can join us for the games in just a moment.